Hey everyone, hope you're having a good week. It's your instructor Ryan Bradshaw for business law, and this week we're talking about Chapter 4, which is dealing with business in the United States Constitution. And it's easy to think about laws and not really care, what laws are and how they impact you. And a good analogy I like to use is when I was younger, before I had kids, I used to see diaper commercials my whole life. Huggies, little kids, babies crawling on the floor, and I never cared about diaper commercials, right? Well, then I started having kids, and all of a sudden I noticed the diaper commercials, and I start looking at all the different features, and it starts to matter, a little bit to me, not that much, but you get the point. So the same thing is true with the law. It doesn't matter until it does, right? And so, like, people don't think about the law until they have to go to court or until something happens and they need some type of legal representation. And so it's important for you to have an awareness of the law, how it works, and how it impacts you, so that when and if you have an interaction with the law, you can be on a higher ground with the knowledge that you've attained here at Wayne Community. And so this chapter, like I said, talks about business and how the United States Constitution works with relation to business. And so we're going to start off. There's a couple of parts of the chapter. And once again, this is not intended to replace the reading, mainly meant as a supplement to complement the reading and to kind of give you an introduction to the reading. And so Constitution and the law, the federal and state constitution are major sources of business law. The United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land of the United States. In addition to individual constitutions established by each state, the U.S. Constitution sets out the fundamental rules and principles by which the country and individual states are governed. So the political system that divides authority between the state and the federal government is known as federalism. And so there's this constant struggle between states' rights and federal rights. You can see this played out right now in real time with the marijuana industry. States that have legal dispensaries and marijuana-related products, they are doing that in violation of federal law. And so the federal government has basically said that where they haven't officially said this, they've basically taken the stance, though, that in states where they have created laws to govern the dispensing of marijuana, that they're not going to step in. But if you are an individual that owns a marijuana dispensary, you have to be comfortable with the fact that any day, night or day, at any time, the ATF, the government, can come in, take over your whole operation, take all your money, take all your raw materials, and put you in prison because you're in violation of federal law. Now, of course, the state would have something to say about that. And so there is this power dynamic that plays out. But you have to keep in mind that our law system, our legal system, is fluid. Things that were once legal can now be illegal, and vice versa. Things that were once illegal can now be legal. So there was an example of this during Prohibition, where alcohol was legal, then it became illegal, then it became legal again. And so we do have this fluid legal system that we exist in. Federal preemption. The founding fathers created a federal system that would at times preempt state law through the supremacy clause outlined in Article 6 of the Constitution. In other words, since the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, if a state law conflicts with the Constitution, the state law is declared invalid. So if a state tries to do something that's categorically unconstitutional, the federal government can step in and says you cannot do that. When the federal constitution law prevails over the state law, it is said that state law has been preempted. Okay? There's more to these readings. I'm just kind of breaking the ice. The Commerce Clause in the Affordable Care Act. The main source of authority for the federal regulation of interstate and international commerce is the Commerce Clause. So we have to have, you have to understand, states used to be more sovereign than they are today, meaning that states were kind of like mini countries within the greater country of the United States. And some states have had their own currency and their own methodology by which they commenced commerce. And so, in order to encourage free trade and to reduce trade barriers, they came up with the Commerce Clause that governed, actually regulated, how interstate and international commerce should proceed. And you think, why is this all important? Why do I care about this? Well, chances are that a big percentage of the goods and services that you use every day weren't initially developed locally. Good chance that a lot of those goods and services came from a foreign entity or a foreign state, some state outside of your boundaries. If you go to the grocery store and just walk around and look at produce and meats, some of the produce comes from California, some of it comes from other states on the East Coast. Go look at the meat department, look at all the different states and various places that comes from. And granted, we do produce a lot of produce and agricultural products in North Carolina, but we also get resources from all different types of places. North Carolina is the #1 producer of several crops, including sweet potatoes, which it's sweet potato season now. And you can go to different places in the world and find, I'm talking about all over the globe, and find sweet potatoes from North Carolina there. So really, really interesting stuff. So dig deeper on the Commerce Clause. It does mention the Affordable Care Act. That's something that is actually something that's still kind of a contentious point within Congress and government. And there is a third challenge to the Affordable Care Act that's coming up right now. And it will be impacted greatly by the next Supreme Court justice. So you've probably heard, of the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and there's a vacant seat on the Supreme Court. Whoever fills that seat will be vital in determining the legal projection of the country for the next 3 or 4 decades. And so maybe longer if we have, bionic hearts and stuff keeping us alive longer. So, and in any case, it's interesting stuff, and I want you to continue the reading on that. So challenges to and reinterpretations of the Commerce Clause. Ever since the NLRB versus Jones and Laughlin Steel Corporation case, Congress has invoked the Commerce Clause to rule on a diverse range of business and commercial activities, as well as to support social reforms and indirectly impact state commerce. An examination of the United States Code reveals that there are more than 700 legislative provisions that explicitly refer to foreign and interstate commerce. Some examples of federal legislation passed by invoking the Commerce Clause: the Controlled Substance Act, the Federal Mine Safety and Health Act, the Civil Rights Act, the ADA or the American with Disabilities Act, and the Indian Child Welfare Act are examples of Commerce Clause invokement. And so police power and the Dormant Commerce Clause, I'm sorry. So the court have tried to resolve these conflicts within reference to the police power of the states. Police power refers to the residual power granted to each state to safeguard the welfare of their or its inhabitants. Examples of areas in which states tend to exercise their police power are zoning regulations, building codes, and sanitation standards for eating places. However, there are times when the state use of police power impacts interstate commerce. If this exercise of the power interferes with or discriminates against interstate commerce, then the action is generally deemed unconstitutional. So there is these schools of thought that if we have a state that's policing us, then it is infringing on our liberties, and we don't want the state to interfere on our liberty. There's another school of thought that says that the state should regulate and police its citizens to ensure that all citizens are being well cared for and safe. And so, once again, these are points of contentions. Typically, businesses want to thrive and exist in a deregulated environment or an environment with little to no regulation. This allows them to make decisions without having to understand or navigate the legal framework in which they exist. So as an example, if I've got a business that produces a certain amount of waste, there may be a regulation in place that says I can only dispose of my waste a certain way, and because of that, I have to not only have a legal representation in order to help me navigate that framework, but I also need to have a third party possibly, and I pay that third party to dispose of that waste for me, which can be at great cost to me. If I didn't require those things, then I could just dump that waste anywhere I felt appropriate and not worry about it and save the money. And so that's just one example. I know that might be an extreme example, but not really, because businesses are guilty of dumping waste, in all sorts of places. And so you could argue that regulation hinders commerce and it reduces profitability for business. But you could also argue that by doing that, we protect the public from having harmful substances pumped into our atmosphere, into the rivers and streams. And so you have to kind of see both sides of that. And so I'm going to just show you this right here that talks about areas of regulations, and expect you to go back and read through those. I do have one other things I want to bring up. This is the section on constitutional protections. Really, really good stuff. It goes through the first 10 amendments. Very briefly, First Amendment, the right to freedom of speech, press, religion, peaceful assembly. We've got to protect our rights. If we don't protect them, nobody else will. However, you do have the right to free speech. Absolutely, you can say what you want. You also have the responsibility of the consequences from that speech. So if I go say something hateful or something that incites violence or something that is discriminatory or something that is deemed to be hate speech, then there could be consequences for that speech, even though I have the right to say or to communicate those things. The press, you've heard this expression about fake news, and there's a ton of fake news out there, but there's also legitimate news, and it's hard to discern which is what. And so the best advice I can offer you is go to the most reputable sources you can and look at all of them to discern what somewhere in the middle where the truth is. Our society now is very polarized. There are biases everywhere, but I believe that most people exist in the middle. They don't exist on either extreme. And so as somebody that's an academic, you're yourself a scholar, I expect you to be able to do your own research, to think critically, and appreciate these rights that have been bestowed unto you, because without these rights, we would live in a society that is less free, has less liberty, and probably less happy. We have a right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and we want to have a good life. I think most people are seeking out most of the same things. We want to have those similar things. A few more minutes. The Second Amendment establishes government cannot infringe upon its citizens the right to bear arms. Pretty well known. You have a right to keep and bear arms. Third, government cannot quarter soldiers in private houses during peacetime or wartime. Fourth, states that government can only issue warrants with probable cause. They have to have a reason to go get a warrant to get in your business. Fifth, establishes the right of due process. You have a right to appear before a judge. You have a right to a jury of your peers. 6, provides citizens with the right to expeditious public trial, the right to an attorney, the right to an impartial jury. 7th, states that citizens have the right to a trial by jury for common lawsuits involving monetary value of $20. 8th, prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. That is a gray area. There's a lot of gray area in our laws, but what is cruel, what is unusual? Prevents the imposition of excessive fines, and states that government cannot set bail at excessive amounts. So all these things are very subjective. To me, it's cruel and unusual to be in solitary confinement for years. It could be cruel for a couple of weeks. That's my interpretation. The government may have a different interpretation. Number 9, states that the rights to set out in the Bill of Rights do not remove any other rights granted to citizens. And lastly, states that any area over which the federal government is not granted authority through the Constitution is reserved for the states. Where we don't have too much authority from the Fed, we want to have some sovereignty for the states to dictate or actually create laws and regulations that are in the best interest of the people of that state. And continuation, there's some other things I want you to go through and read about, more details within this chapter. But for now, I do appreciate your time and attention. If you have any questions, please let me know. And as always, I'm here to help you if you need anything. Have a great week, guys. Talk to you soon.